The Vietnam War is remembered for many things: political tension, guerrilla warfare, and its devastating human cost. But there's one part of it that still shocks people when they hear about it: the traps. Booby traps, punji pits, spike-filled tunnels, hidden mines. These weren't just clever tricks. They were horrifying, brutal, and effective. They didn't just injure soldiers, they broke spirits. Today, we're diving into this darker side of the war, the part that made every footstep in the jungle a gamble. We'll explore the most horrible, most feared, and most painful traps used in the Vietnam War. Some of them were so terrifying that soldiers feared the jungle more than the enemy. So stick around. What you're about to hear is not just history. It's a look into one of the most brutal survival tactics ever used in warfare. Introduction to the trap warfare. The Vietnam War was unlike any other war fought before. It wasn't about big tanks rolling across open fields. It wasn't about air raids on major cities. This was a war of hidden enemies, surprise attacks, and a jungle that seemed alive with danger. The Viet Cong were fighting an enemy, the U.S. military, that was better equipped, had more soldiers, and more advanced weapons. But the jungle was their ally. And traps? Traps were their secret weapon. They turned the very earth underfoot into a deadly battleground. Traps weren't just about killing. They were about slowing down soldiers, about terrifying them, wounding them in ways that stuck. A gunshot might kill one man, but a trap could injure one and force 5 others to carry him, care for him, protect him. It was smart, cruel, and effective. Let's start breaking down the worst of the worst. 1. Punji stick traps. Simple but brutal. Punji sticks were the most iconic trap of the war. They were simple, bamboo spikes, often sharpened and sometimes coated with toxins. But their simplicity is what made them so deadly. These sticks were placed in pits or arranged under trapdoors. Soldiers walking through dense brush wouldn't even see them until it was too late. One wrong step, and a soldier's leg would go straight down into a pit of spikes. Worse still, the Viet Cong often rubbed the sticks with feces or poison. Even if a soldier survived the initial injury, infection would set in quickly. The wound would swell. It would fester. Without fast medical attention, it could lead to amputation or death. In some cases, they didn't want a soldier to die. A dead soldier was gone. But an injured one, he screamed, needed help, slowed the squad down, demoralized everyone. That was the real strategy. 2. Tiger pits, death from below. Imagine walking through the jungle, leaves crunching underfoot. You take one wrong step, and suddenly the earth gives way. You're falling into a dark pit. And at the bottom, dozens of sharpened bamboo spikes, all pointing upward. These were tiger pits, named after the traps used to catch tigers in ancient times. These pits were covered with foliage and brush to make them invisible. Some were 6 feet deep, others were 10. It didn't matter how deep. They were meant to kill or permanently disable anyone who fell in. The spikes didn't just stab. They tore. Soldiers who landed in these pits could end up with shattered bones, pierced organs, and severe bleeding. Getting them out of the pit was another nightmare. Under fire, in the heat, in the middle of the jungle. Tiger pits didn't just trap the body. They crushed morale. 3. Bamboo whip traps, fast and painful. Bamboo whip traps were hidden killers. These traps were usually set at chest or face level. A bent bamboo pole was held back with a trigger. Attached to it, razor-sharp spikes or shards of glass. When a soldier tripped the wire, snap, the bamboo whip would swing around with massive force, striking the victim directly. Some were designed to slash, others to stab. If a soldier was unlucky, it could hit them in the face or neck. One strike could kill. If it didn't, it left brutal wounds. Bleeding, screaming. In the chaos of a firefight, that moment of distraction could be fatal for the whole unit. These traps didn't require much to build. A knife, some bamboo, and rope. But their impact? Terrifying. 4. Swinging spike traps, the jungle's guillotine. The swinging spike trap took the whip trap to another level. These were bigger, heavier, and even deadlier. Often called door traps or rocker traps, they were suspended on tree branches or tied between trunks. When a soldier walked into the tripwire, the trap would swing down. fast. Imagine a heavy log with nails or sharpened bamboo poles attached to it, flying toward you at head height. These traps could crush bones, cave in skulls, or drive spikes through the chest. They didn't always kill, but that was part of the horror. They maimed, they disfigured, and once someone got hit, the jungle echoed with their screams. 5. The Bouncing Betty, a soldier's worst fear. Technically, this was a mine, but the Bouncing Betty deserves a spot on this list because of how horrifying it was. When stepped on, the mine didn't just explode. It launched itself into the air, about 3 to 4 feet high, and then exploded. That meant the blast wasn't at the feet. It was at chest, stomach, or groin level. Shrapnel would fly in every direction, ripping through multiple people. These mines were designed to kill not just the person who stepped on it, but anyone nearby. Soldiers were trained to freeze when they heard the click. Some lived just long enough to realize what had happened before it tore them apart. 6. Nail board traps, hidden pain. These traps were wooden boards filled with nails or spikes. Simple again, but terrifying. They were laid on jungle paths, covered with leaves or dirt. A soldier would step on one, and the nails would pierce straight through the sole of his boot into his foot. In the best case, it meant pain and limping. In the worst case, nerve damage, infection, or total immobilization. These weren't meant to kill. They were meant to hurt. A lot. And once again, one man injured meant others had to carry him. Fewer guns to fight. More pressure on the squad. Sometimes they were double-layered. So when medics tried to pull the board out, more spikes would spring up. It was brutal. 7. The punji stake in a box trap, a deadly surprise. This trap was a variation of the original punji stick design, but much more sinister. The bamboo stakes were placed inside a box or crate, designed to spring open when triggered. These boxes were set up to look completely harmless. Sometimes they were hidden under leaves or camouflaged with branches, so soldiers had no idea what lay beneath them. When a tripwire was activated, the box would snap open, and the bamboo spikes would spring out at full force. These spikes would stab into the soldier's body, causing deep, agonizing wounds. The trap was designed to be vicious, causing not only physical injury but psychological distress as well. Imagine walking through the dense jungle, knowing that every step you took could lead to an unexpected encounter with one of these deadly traps. The Viet Cong set these traps in places where soldiers were likely to walk, such as along well-trodden paths or near supply routes. The design was cruelly effective. It turned ordinary terrain into a minefield of hidden dangers. 8. Rope and snare traps, fast and furious. Rope and snare traps were used to catch soldiers off guard. A length of rope would be tied to a tree or pole, often stretched across a path with a loop at the end. When a soldier tripped a wire, the loop would tighten around their leg, neck, or torso, lifting them off the ground or choking them. The victim would be left hanging, vulnerable to further attack. The ropes used in these traps were often designed to be strong enough to suspend a soldier in midair. The snare could be set in trees or on the ground, and the soldier would have no way of knowing until it was too late. Once trapped, the soldier could be incapacitated, easy prey for the enemy. This trap wasn't about killing. It was about capturing. Sometimes the soldiers would be left alive and in pain, hanging for hours until rescue came or until they succumbed to their injuries. In many cases, the snare would leave the victim with long-lasting physical damage, both from the rope and the mental trauma of being suspended and helpless. 9. The landmine traps, a jungle littered with death. Landmines were a staple of the war in Vietnam, often laid down to create fields of death. These mines were not just placed on the ground. They were buried, hidden beneath the earth, and disguised with leaves or twigs. The Bouncing Betty mine, as mentioned earlier, was the most famous example, but there were many others. Landmines were typically set in areas where the enemy was likely to pass, near trails, roads, or supply routes. They were designed to maim rather than kill outright, forcing soldiers into difficult situations. Once a soldier stepped on a mine, the explosion would cause massive damage. The force was often enough to throw soldiers into the air, leaving them badly injured or killed. What made these mines so terrifying was the unpredictability. You couldn't see them. You couldn't avoid them unless you were already on high alert. Many soldiers learned to fear the jungle floor beneath them, knowing that each step could be their last. The psychological toll of these traps was massive. Even when soldiers thought they had cleared an area of mines, there was always a lingering threat that more were hidden, just waiting to be triggered. 10. The spider hole, hidden in plain sight. Spider holes were small, hidden bunkers dug into ground, usually large enough to hold 1 or 2 soldiers. These pits were often used for ambushes and surprise attacks. The Viet sowing would dig the holes and cover them with leaves, branches, or dirt, making them nearly impossible to spot. When an unsuspecting soldier walked by, the enemy inside would spring out, often attacking with a knife or rifle, before retreating back into the hole. These traps were terrifying because they didn't just cause physical harm, they caused fear. The idea that the enemy could be hiding right under your feet in an otherwise peaceful spot was a major source of psychological terror. Spider holes were most effective when they were used to create confusion and chaos. Soldiers would never know when they were in danger. Was the jungle silent because there was no enemy nearby, or because the enemy was hiding, waiting? 11. The booby trap, a war of uncertainty. Booby traps in the Vietnam War were anything but simple. While many were made with basic materials like bamboo, rope, or wood, the ingenuity behind these traps made them incredibly dangerous. They were often set in places where soldiers would least expect them, beneath piles of leaves, inside hollowed-out logs, or behind rocks. A booby trap could be triggered by the smallest movement. For example, a tripwire might be attached to a grenade or explosive charge, and when a soldier stepped on the wire, the device would go off. It didn't matter if the soldier was far away from the trap or not. They could still be caught in the blast. What made these traps so effective was that they weren't just about physical harm. They were about creating a constant sense of danger and uncertainty. Soldiers had to constantly be on guard, looking for tripwires, unexploded grenades, and hidden devices that might blow up at any second. It wasn't just the enemy you had to worry about. It was the ground beneath your feet. The psychological effect of these traps. While the traps themselves were horrifying, their psychological effect was perhaps even more devastating. Soldiers in the Vietnam War lived with the constant knowledge that the jungle itself could kill them. Every step they took could be their last. The fear of stepping on a hidden spike, falling into a punji pit, or being caught in a snare was overwhelming. This sense of dread didn't just impact soldiers on the battlefield. It affected them long after they left the war. Many soldiers suffered from PTSD, not just from the violence and trauma of combat, but from the constant fear and paranoia that came with living in an environment where death could strike at any moment. The psychological toll of these traps lasted a lifetime. Veterans often spoke of the nightmares they had, dreams where they were walking to the jungle, and every shadow, every rustle of leaves, made them fear that they were about to trigger another deadly trap. The traps used in the Vietnam War were a perfect example of how the environment, the terrain, and the ingenuity of the fighters could be used to turn the tables in a conflict. These weren't just weapons of war. They were tools of terror, designed to maim, kill, and demoralize the enemy. The war wasn't just fought with guns and bombs. It was fought with fear, uncertainty, and the constant threat of hidden death. The traps left deep scars, not just on the bodies of the soldiers who were caught in them, but on the minds of all who fought in the war. They are a dark part of history, a reminder that the most terrifying weapons are often the simplest, and that the jungle itself could be as deadly as any army. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of the most brutal aspects of the Vietnam War. If you found this video fascinating, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more history videos. Stay tuned for more stories from the past that continue to shape our world today.